Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of Mortal Realms Monday painting videos. So this week we are taking a look at the Stormsire Cursebreaker, or at least one of them, that came with issue 27 of the Mortal Realms magazine. And you can see here that I've undercoated the model in a grey primer. This is the Rust-Oleum grey primer. And you'll notice just off the side of the painting handle there that I've left the sword off the back of him. This is so that I can paint the back of the sword as well as the area under the sword without any problems. So if you're planning on following this video or using it for inspiration, then I'd recommend doing the same there, and it'll give you easier access and less grey spots or unpainted areas. So to start off with, I'm applying a layer of Incubi, or a couple of layers of Incubi Darkness over all of the armor plate. So that's his legs, his obviously his chest and his back, as well as his fingers. Now on his hands he's wearing gloves with these big fabric type gauntlet pieces, and what I decided to do was have the fingers as the Incubi Darkness metallic type thing, with the small plate that's on the back of his hand, and then the actual gauntlet part of it, the rest of the glove, as in black. So it's almost like it's a cuff more than an actual glove. Or the glove has these metallic fingers and then the cloth fabric at the back of them. Another thing to note, guys, is obviously the painting scheme for this is a little bit different to what I've been doing with past videos. Obviously with past videos I've focused on painting the Knights of Azir, which is the gold and blue colouring. But I've noticed a lot of you guys are wanting to stay away from that paint scheme, because it's too generic, and it's, you know, it's the poster boy, and everybody wants to do something a little bit different to that. The other reason for that is the magazines themselves show you how to paint that scheme, and it is a simple painting scheme. So from this point onwards I'm focusing on the Celestial Vindicators, obviously with the main reasons being, as I just described. The second reason is, aside from using these models for painting videos for you guys, they are also my own personal army. You know, I'm collecting them for myself as well. And like some of you guys, I think that the gold, it's just a bit too generic and a bit too much. I like the colour scheme of the Knights of Azir when I did it back in one of my earlier videos as an alternate painting scheme. So I've decided to go ahead and continue from this point onwards, as well as repaint my previous models from previous videos in the Knights of Azir. Hopefully that's okay with you guys. You know, it shows an alternate colour scheme that we can do from this point onwards. If you are following along, then, you know, apologies to you guys that we're doing them in the Knights of Azir. If, you know, it is what it is. Anyway, I'm now going to get on and apply this first coat over all of the armour, and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so now that the Incubi Darkness has a good opaque layer to it, you know, even coverage, I'm now going in and painting up all of the black areas. So for this I'm using Abaddon Black, and the areas that I'm painting up with this colour is going to be anything that will be metallic, so whether it's gold or silver. This gives it a good dark base coat for the metallic colours, and anywhere that obviously is going to be black. For the Knights of Azir, there's not a huge amount of reference for them, so some of the colour scheme I'm sort of, you know, making up as I go along, with what I feel looks right. So the black areas for this is the front cloth, loincloth that he has at the on the front here. It's actually a double layer cloth. You've got one further back which is red, and then this smaller one at the front which is black. Also the back of any of the red cloth, which is his cloak that he's wearing, as well as the piece behind what I'm painting now. The back of those will also be black, so the inside of anything is black, and the outside of this part, as well as the two pieces that are hanging down from his arms, I also decided to do in black rather than red. I just felt that it looked better than I thought it would if I had done it in red. Also his gauntlets, the cloth part of them, or leather, whatever you want to call it, will be black. So yeah, those are the black areas: the gloves, the belt, the smaller tabard at the front, and the inside of the cloaks and robes, and any gold area or any metallic areas. So I'll get on with that, and we'll come back in just a bit so you can see what that looks like once the black is all done. Okay, so once all the black areas are done, which you can see here, I'm now painting up the red areas. And the way that I'm painting this particular model is get a base colour of each main area down first, and then start highlighting and shading those areas individually. So for the red areas, I'm doing the leather straps that he has at the front here, and you'll notice that every other strap has this small decal piece on the bottom. Those are going to be gold, so obviously I've undercoated those with black ready for that. But the leather straps themselves on both sides are going to be red, as well as the cloth down at between his legs, behind the black one, is obviously red as well as the main cloak on his back. So again, as with all colours, slightly thinned down. My paints I've transferred into dropper bottles. I'm using all GW paints for this, but I've transferred them into dropper bottles, and during that process I added a small amount of water to make it easier to transfer, which means that I don't have to thin my paints on the wet palette here. The water that's in the paint already, as well as that on the wet palette, means that I don't have to thin my paints. But if you're going straight from the pots, then obviously it is recommended to thin your paints. With that being said though, I do have a couple of paints that are a little bit thicker in the dropper bottles, and for those you may see that I add a little bit of water, or if I just find that the consistency is a little bit too much, too thick for what I want, then I'll thin it down anyway. But for the most part, if I'm not seen to be thinning them, then that is purely for the fact that they are essentially thinned a little bit anyway. They are thin enough to use out of the dropper bottles. So anyway, I'm going to get on with the red here, and I'll catch you guys back in just a sec. Okay, so with all the red done, I'm now using some Corax white. The reason for this is it's slightly grayer than Ceramite white or White Scar. It has a slightly grey tone to it, which works great as a sort of a mid-tone before using White Scar as a highlight. So this is going to be used for all of the white areas, and for this that's going to be his shoulder pauldrons, his hair and beard, the flame on his hand, although I don't do it at this point. I end up doing it with White Scar later on. But if you are following along with this video or wanting to use this same paint scheme, then at this point I would recommend doing the flame. I just didn't think about it at the time. And also you'll notice on the cloth that hangs from his arms, I haven't painted the ends of them with the black. That's because there's a little shape that's been sculpted into the cloth there, and I painted that shape white, so that it gives a little bit of a contrast with the black cloth. Rather than it just being black all the way down, it has these nice little white patterned ends. So I'll get on with this, and we'll come back in just a minute for the next step. Okay, so now that we've got essentially the base colours down for each of the main areas, I'm now going in with some Sotek green, and I'm going to use this to cover the majority of the Incubi Darkness. And the idea for this is the Incubi Darkness obviously gives a good underbase for this Sotek green, but it also gives a good shadow in those recessed areas. So I'm not going all the way up to the shadow area, or areas where I want shadow, where two armor pieces would meet. I'm leaving a thin area of the Incubi Darkness in there, just to have that little bit of shadow line between these areas of Sotek green. Otherwise, for the most part, you know, the majority, I'd say 90% of the armor is going to be covered in the Sotek green. Now you'll notice I did thin it down slightly there. This is so I can get a little bit of a, not so much a glaze, but just a slightly thinner layer. So it'll take a couple more layers to apply this, but it means that I can get a slightly darker area in some of those shadows, sort of under, you know, underneath the armor, under the model, using the Incubi Darkness to contrast with that thinned down Sotek green. So like I said, this will go all over the armor. 90% of the armor will be covered with this. Just leave those recesses and areas where two different armor pieces will meet. For example, the pec piece here and that little piece at the bottom that angles out, where those two meet in that little inverted corner, I'll leave some of the Incubi Darkness as a shade line there. The same again with the feet plates as they step down. Where that steps down and that meets, that area there will be left with the Incubi Darkness as well. So, you know, just think about where shadow would be if the light was coming from above, and for me it's above and slightly to the left, and just get this, the main colour of the armour everywhere except those deep shadow areas. So I'll get on with this and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so for this next piece I'm now going to shade in all of the Sotek green and the armour, and for this I'm using 4 drops of Lamian medium, so it's essentially 4 parts. Like I say, I'm using dropper bottles. Then I'll take the equivalent to about 2 drops of Incubi Darkness. Obviously this is just shy of 1 drop here, but I'm leaving this part unedited so you guys can see, you know, how I'm mixing this up. And with this I'll use a little bit of water and some Abaddon black to darken it up slightly. This is because the Incubi Darkness has now been thinned down with the water, and I find that it goes a little bit too light, or too much like the underlying Incubi Darkness, and you can't really tell a difference. So I add a little bit more Incubi Darkness and some of the Abaddon black just to darken it up a little bit, so that this will become more of a shade. And all I'm going to use this for is obviously to go over the armour to tone down that Sotek green slightly, but I'm not going to let it pool on any of the flat areas. It's more of a glaze over those, and then in the recesses I'll let this pool up slightly. You know, I'll paint it in or line it into those recesses to just give a bit more of a shadow. So you can see here going over the top, and as that dries that will lighten up a little bit, and then just making sure that I get it down in those recesses and you know, the joins between the armour. this will add, you know, a natural shadow. I prefer using this mix to actually using the pre-made shades. I find that the shades tend to stain at the surface a little too much. This mix, it doesn't so much sit on the surface. It will flow into the recesses a little bit better than the pre-made shades do, and I have a little bit more control over it. So if you guys have some Lumia medium, or you want to give it a shot, have a go and you know, see what you think compared to the shades, the pre-made shades. So obviously lining anywhere that is going to have that shadow, and then once the majority of the this wash has been pulled off with the brush, I'll then go over a flat area of armour and just make sure that it doesn't sit on there, but just gives it a slightly darker overtone. So you can see I'm just removing it, the paint there, and just getting the overtone. So I'll jump ahead now, and we'll take a look at highlighting over the top of this for the next step. Catch you in a sec. Right, so now that the wash has had a time to dry, I'm now going in and adding the first of the 2 or 3 highlights to the green. And for this I'm using Arimum Blue, and I'm just edge highlighting anywhere that is essentially a sharp edge, as well as the apex of curves and things like that. This isn't a huge contrast between the Sotek Green and the Arimum Blue, but it is enough to give a bit of a definition. With this model, he's part of a squad of 3, or a unit of 3. As far as I'm aware, with Mortal Realms, that is the general unit size. So instead of getting him painted to a battle standard, as I would with say a unit of Night Haunts, or any other larger unit of sort of 10 or more models, I'm going in with a bit more detail on this guy, as they're going to be a bit more noticeable within their unit. So it's not quite as detailed as a character, but it's a little bit more detailed than a standard unit, a standard troops choice. I think the term for this is parade ready. So it's a little bit more complicated. It takes a little bit more time. I think this one took me around about 3.5 to 4 hours painting. Obviously that's including recording time and everything else. So probably around about 3.5 hours to paint this, if I wasn't recording. So like I said, with this I'm just picking out the main definition of the highlight areas, so obviously giving a little bit more shape and definition to certain parts of the armour. This doesn't have to be super thin lines, as it's going to have the thinner highlights within it. This is just to give a little bit more highlight. So I'll get on with this and come back in just a bit. Okay, so I've now taken some white scar here and a little bit of that Arimum Blue, and I'm mixing up a shade or a highlight to go over the highlights that we've just done, and a little bit of Sotek Green there, just to give it that a little bit more turquoise green look, as obviously the Arimum Blue is a blue, and the Sotek Green has a little bit of green in it. So this now is going to be used as a finer highlight, more for where the light would catch the most sort of points of the armour. This won't cover the full length of the previous highlights, but it is a very sharp edge highlight. So this is going just over the any of these sharp corners and edges, Obviously not too far down into shadow areas, although the previous highlight would have done that. This highlight doesn't. So yeah, essentially follow over almost everywhere that you did with the previous highlight, just in a very smaller, shorter, thinner line. With the knee pauldron here, you'll notice that it's thin, but it does still have two edges, and so what I'm trying to do here is just highlight both edges and leave that little bit of darker on the flat surface. Obviously highlighting the points of the feet here. As the foot is stepped forward, the light will catch both sides of it. If that was further back, then obviously the light wouldn't catch it as easy. So it's just bearing in mind where my light source is, where it's coming from, or where I think the light would hit most. So I'll get on with this, and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so now that the main armour is finished, I'm now going in with some white scar and just pulling this over the hair, you know, not letting it get down into the recesses too much, and this is more for, again, about 75-80% of the hair, leaving the area nearer the roots a little bit darker with that Korvax white. Also, any of the areas that I did paint with the Korvax white are going to get, again, a majority overcoat with this, leaving some of the recesses and the sort of the deeper areas as the Korvax white, that slightly grey tone. So obviously any area that is white is going to get the white scar. That's the hair, the shoulder pauldrons. This is the point where I will paint the flame white. If you are following along, then obviously you may have done that earlier when I explained the flame being white. And obviously also painting the gem here, which I did forget with the Korvax white, but the white scar is, you know, good enough. So again, I'll jump on ahead and we'll be back in just a bit, guys. Okay, so moving on to the black cloth, I'm now using a mix of Administratum Grey and a little bit of Incubi Darkness mixed into it. This is because the Administratum Grey was a little bit too bright for me, a little bit too grey. The mix that I've made up actually looks very close to Eshin Grey, so you could probably substitute that in this area. But essentially what I'm doing is edge highlighting any of the peaked and raised up areas of the black cloth, and then what I'll do is thin this down slightly and glaze over a couple of times over some of the larger, flatter areas where light will still get to, just to give a slight blue-grey tint to the black cloth, so that it's not essentially pure black. I find that pure black just looks too flat, so it's better to highlight, and instead of using pure black as your main colour, use something like this with black as the majority of the shadow areas. You'll notice the area that I've just lined there, there's a small line sculpted into the cuff. On the outer edge of that line, I'll actually paint that white. It's something that I decided to do a little bit later on. The full black cuff just looked a bit too much, so I decided to give it a white trim around the edge. So again, if you're following along, then you can do the same there. You can see that I've done that along the cloth at the front there, You've got the white trim on the bottom, and I'll do the same as that with the gauntlets. Okay, and just to show you quickly, this is the thin down glaze that I'm applying over the black for the flat areas of highlight. Once I've applied this, I will go back over with a thin glaze of Abaddon black, just to tone that down and blend it back into that cloth a little bit, so it's not so bright grey looking. But again, I'll apply this to most of the black areas where the light would catch the most, and then tone that back with the black. Okay, so next up here, I'm going to use some corn red to paint in the weaved handle areas of the staff and the sword. I'm using the corn red as opposed to the Mephiston red, as it has a slightly more pinkish tone to it, and will stand out, you know, from his cloak and leather. It will look a different colour. I didn't want to use the red here. I just thought it would be, you know, too similar. I wanted something a little bit different. You'll also notice that his face has a slightly pink tone to it. This was a failed attempt at trying to be a bit cheap and quick on the skin tone, just sort of an experimentation, so I've left it out of the video. But essentially it was just a thin down Cadian flesh tone washed over his face, trying to use that grey underpaint as some natural highlights, but it didn't work, so I will paint the face a little bit later on. You'll also notice that the flame has a little bit of darkening along the top of it. This was just the Incubi Darkness watered down mix that I have there on the palette, that large splodge in the middle from earlier on in the video. Just applied over the top and letting it sort of sink into some of the recesses there. Nothing too strong, it was just to dirty up the top of the flame a little bit, so that when I come to applying a colour over the top later on, that will give it a natural darkness towards the top of the flame, leaving the centre near his palm a lot brighter. So what I'm now doing is mixing a little bit of corn red into some white scar, and just gently applying this over the top of the corn red that I've just laid down. I'm not too worried about going into some of the recesses. This is more to pick off the highlights, as I'm going to apply a wash over the top of this anyway, a shade, which will darken up the corn red and show off this highlight that I'm applying. So I'll get on with this, and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so moving on to the red cloak now. I'm using some Evil Sun's Scarlet to sketch in the main highlights and the sort of the brighter areas of the cloak. I'll then thin this down and blend it in a little more to the Mephiston red, but essentially this is going over any of the flat surface areas that are either parallel to the ground, where the light is obviously going to hit flat, or on the right hand side of folds. So the left hand side is going to be in shadow, the right hand side is a little bit more lit up. So you can see here I'm just trying to thin that down slightly so that I can build it up. Obviously this is going to be a slightly darker area, as it's a little bit more around the, hard to explain, it's a little bit more underneath him rather than further out, so you know it's overshadowed by these upper folds of cloth, so the highlight doesn't have to be as strong. So yeah, I'm just like I say, multiple glazes over the top of this, multiple layers, and just trying to brighten up those areas of Mephiston red, building it up gradually so I can get a nice build up in tone from the Mephiston red up to this Evil Sun Scarlet. So I'll get on with this, and we'll be back in just a bit. And welcome back. So I'm now using some Wild Rider red, and this is the edge highlight for any of the red areas. With the leather straps here, I'm trying to give it a little bit of a worn leather look. Just something simple with these highlights. So rather than do sharp, straight, clean edges, I'm doing slightly scratchy highlights that come into the leather slightly. This is just to represent, you know, scratches and where the leather starts to dry out and break apart slightly. So sort of worn edges and things like that. So just adding some texture to that leather so that it doesn't look so clean and flat. You'll notice that I did something a little bit similar with the highlights on the arm on the top of his leg there, and a little bit with the black cloth on the highlight there. But obviously I'm doing it to a more extreme with the leather here. The red robe on the back, not so much. I'll use this just as a edge highlight on the apex of those folds, as well as some of the sharper edges as it tucks into his belt at the other top. Okay, so with the red finished, I'm now taking some of that Incubi Darkness mix and very thin down. I'm just applying it to his hair and beard, just to add some shadow into that grey. I think this is a very simple, quick, easy way to do hair. It's not the most detailed look, but personally I think it works, or at least for this guy. So like I say, just washing it over, getting it into those recesses, letting it pull up a little bit, and then I'll dry brush over the top of that with the white scar, just to pick off some of those white highlights. Now I'm just thinning that down a little bit more, and I'm going to run this around the recesses of the pauldrons, right where it comes up against the black there, which is going to be obviously the gold. I want a little bit of a shadow on the pauldron there, so that's going to sit in that gap, and just touch slightly onto the white, which will give it a slightly blue-grey tone to it, so that it does, it's just a way to shadow white. I find is just to give it a slightly grey-blue tone, or grey-blue shadow. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier with the staff here, I wasn't too fussed about getting some of that pink highlight into the recesses, as this stage will cover them, and this stage is applying a shade of Druchii Violet. Nice and simple. I do like using this for pinks and reds as a shadow, especially with the corn red. It just gives it that slightly more purple tint to it, and with the pink highlights there, they'll show through this, and just act as a pre-made highlight. So nice and simple, and we can move on. Right, so with the majority of the model finished, it's now time to move on to the gold. So for the first base coat, I'm using Balthazar Gold, and this is essentially just going to cover any of the gold areas, and this will act as a shadow. The technique, I believe, is called True Metallic Metal. It's more of a basic version of that. I won't go into super detail with it. It just be a case of, like I have with the other matte paints, I'll just go in with a shadow tone, highlight that with a mid-tone, and then highlight that with you know, a brighter version or a brighter tone. In this sense of golds, it will be Balthazar Gold, Retributor Armour, and Stormhost Silver. So any of the black areas that are left, excluding obviously the cloth, so anywhere that we haven't highlighted with the grey, is going to be gold. So I'm just going to apply this gold all over. If you are following along, then obviously you can do the same. If you're looking for inspiration, then obviously this will give you some idea, but we'll be back in just a tick. Okay, so moving on to the flame and a little bit of experimentation. I'm now using some Tesseract Glow and just applying this over the flame. I find that this has a very nice vibrant green look to it. I wanted the vibrant look for the flame rather than going for a blue or red flame, just to give it that sort of eerie look. And with that underpainting that I did on the top, you can see that it gives a natural darkness or shadow towards the top of the flame. The experimentation part of this is what you can see me now doing, and that's some OSL or object source lighting. So what I'm trying to do is get a glow effect from this flame, just on parts of his glove, the armour, and some of his hair. This is probably the 4th or 5th time I've ever tried something like this. I'm happy with the results. It could be better. You know, like I say, it's an experimentation. I'm now using some Hexwraith Flame just for the darker tone. As the light moves further away, obviously it's going to get a little bit sort of a little bit darker. It's hard to explain, but not so vibrant and bright as it would be closer to the flame. So just blending this up and away into the colour, the underlying colour. The reason I'm using these two paints is I love the way that they stain the undercolour, but they'll still show, if there's other than white obviously, if there's any undercolour to it, it will still show that through it a little bit, which is what light essentially does. You know, light, unless it's an extremely strong light, it's not going to change the undercolour to the same colour as the light. It's going to more highlight it and just change the tone of that colour. So with the red, for example, it will still look red, but it will have a brighter, because the light is coloured, it's going to have that greenish tint to it, but it's still going to have that red there. And I think that these two technical paints work brilliant for this. So obviously just applying some of that to the flame just to darken it up a little bit on the outer edges of the flame there. So anyway, I'll get on with this and then we'll come back in just a bit. Okay, so now for highlighting the gold, I'm using Retributor Armour, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm picking out the majority of the flat surfaces, leaving obviously the Balthazar Gold as an inner shadow, especially picking out anything from the top down, and then leaving some of the underside more with the Balthazar Gold, and just picking out edge highlights on those areas. But for the majority of the top area and the side sort of more flat surfaces, I'll pick off edges and some of the flatter areas with the Retributor Armour. Like I say, the Balthazar Gold, because they are, you know, it is slightly darker, a little bit more dirty looking or muddy looking, it works as a good shadow for the Retributor Armour. The other way that I could have done this would be to coat it in Retributor Armour first and then apply a wash of Reikland Flesh Shade gloss, and that would have, you know, sunk into those recesses. But I like the way that I can paint in a similar style to I did with the the blue on the armour, only with metallic colours. So obviously I'll go over all the metallic areas with this, and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so to highlight the Retributor armour, I'm now using some Stormhost silver, and just very carefully picking out where some extreme highlights would be, so where the light would catch the most on that gold. So things like the apex of curves, the points, sharp corners and things like that. You can also see here, whilst I'm doing this, that the glow effect from the flame, I'm happy with it. I think it looks, it looks good. The face, I went in and applied a straight coat of Cadian flesh tone, and then in the eyes, to give him sort of this electric glow look to his eyes, I applied a watered down or a thinned down Ahriman blue, going slightly around the outside of the eyes to give it that blue glow effect. And then once that dried, I then dotted in some thinned down Sotek green with a little bit of Incubi darkness just into so it would go settle around the eyeballs in the recess, just to give it a little bit of shadow in there. I think that this gives it a good sort of electric look to his eyes. I then went in and highlighted his pupils with some white, and then a very small dot of black in the centre of those. This was obviously done off camera. I thought I was recording it at the time, but it turned out I wasn't. Later on, the same thing. I thought I was recording it, but I wasn't. I just take some of that Incubi Darkness wash and apply that to the right hand side of his face, so his left hand side, but as we look at it, it's the right hand side. This is because obviously the flame is lighting up the left hand side of his face, so I wanted some deep shadow, especially where he's got his arm raised up. That's going to cause some deep shadow in there. So half of his face I did with the a wash of that, and that essentially darkened up his face, creating a nice contrasting shadow to the brighter lit up side of his face. Okay, so at this point the model is finished, and what you can see me doing here is an experimentation of trying to get an electric lightning effect coming from the center orb piece, just at the top of the hammer there, almost like the staff has, a lightning effect coming from it. I'm not 100% happy with it. I may go back over this and repaint it and leave it just as the gold. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think of it, but like I say, personally I'm not 100% happy with it. I think the area that I'm doing it on is a little too textured to get it to look like some sort of electric or lightning, and it just looks like broken up lines of paint on the area. So yeah, not too happy with the result of this, but I'm not just here to show you how I paint the perfect side of things. I'd like you to see some of my mistakes so that you can learn from them and decide for yourself whether or not you like something. But yeah, right, and there we have it, guys, the finished piece. I'm happy with him. Like I say, aside from the lightning on the staff there, although in the video it doesn't look too bad, but in person I'm not 100% set on it. But there he is, he's finished. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope that it's helpful to some of you. If some of you decide to follow along, then I hope that it really does help. Thanks a lot for joining me. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, hit that like button. If you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing. It will obviously help the channel grow. I'd like to grow the channel and improve my videos and put out more content for you guys. And subscriptions, you guys subscribing and liking my videos, inspires me to keep doing that. If you have any comments, throw them down in the comment section. I would love to hear feedback from you guys, what you think of my videos, you know, whether they're helpful, whether you enjoyed them, how you think they could be improved, things like that. So yeah, that's the end of today's video, guys. Thanks a lot for joining me, and until next time, take it easy and keep painting those minis.